It took exactly 47 seconds for the room to shift, for the faint mechanical buzz of the ceiling vents and the soft murmuring of aides in the back row to dissolve into a stillness so absolute it felt engineered. The moment would later be replayed across news cycles, slowed down, annotated, dissected by analysts who insisted they could pinpoint the precise second when Karoline Leavitt realized the truth she had constructed could no longer support its own weight. But here, at the very beginning, no one in the chamber knew what was coming. The hearing room of the House Committee on Governmental Accountability was a place built to elevate seriousness. The mahogany tables reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting above, the carpet, a deep navy embedded with thousands of tiny brass stars, muted every footstep. The long, elevated dais formed a half-moon of authority, 13 microphones, 13 nameplates, and 13 elected officials waiting to carve clarity out of contradiction. At the center sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, posture straight, hands folded over a thin binder the color of slate. Her expression was controlled, almost serene, but her eyes revealed calculation. She was prepared. Across the witness table, seated at a slight angle to avoid the glare of a camera positioned 6 feet away, was Karoline Leavitt. Her suit jacket was crisp, tailored in a way meant to project confidence, yet it did little to hide the tension gathering at the base of her neck. She had spent the previous evening rehearsing with legal advisors, refining responses, memorizing statutory language she had never needed before. She knew the stakes. The committee was examining alleged misuse of a federally funded communications grant tied to a civic outreach initiative, mundane on the surface, until a leaked memo suggested political messaging directives buried within the instructions. What troubled the committee more than the memo itself was the inconsistency between Leavitt's public statements and the internal emails obtained under subpoena. The contradictions were not explosive, but they were precise, timelines that didn't align, metadata that implied edits, directives issued without authorization. Enough to raise suspicion. Enough to invite oversight. Jasmine Crockett had requested the first round of questioning not for theatrical effect, but because she had studied the witness longer than anyone else. Her legal background sharpened her instincts. She recognized the cadence of a prepared statement, the rhythm of strategically placed pauses, the telltale signs of someone hoping the committee would not ask the one question they feared most. Crockett's binder contained only 4 pages. She never needed more. A single yellow sticky note protruded from the top, marking a section from 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, the statute concerning false statements to the government. It was not there as a threat, but as a reminder of the boundary between omission and deception. The line Leavitt risked crossing. As the chairperson ran through the formalities, roll call, procedural advisories, a reminder that witnesses must respond under oath, Crockett remained still. The cameras clicked softly each time someone shifted. Staffers scribbled notes in the margins of briefing folders. A red recording light glowed steadily at the back of the room. The air felt dense, as though the oxygen carried anticipation. Leavitt adjusted the microphone. The faint scrape of her bracelet against the table echoed louder than expected. Crockett noticed. So did the cameras. When the chairperson concluded the opening statements and yielded the floor, Crockett leaned forward by a fraction of an inch, an almost imperceptible motion, yet one that signaled the beginning of something deliberate. She opened her binder. The hinge of the cover whispered against the table. "Ms. Leavitt," she began, her voice calm and unhurried, "before we proceed, I want to note for the record that your testimony today concerns statements previously attributed to you regarding the distribution protocols of the Civic Engagement Grant." Leavitt swallowed once. The movement was small, but unmistakable. "Understood," she replied. Crockett nodded, eyes steady. "Good. Then let's begin with the basics." But the silence wasn't over yet. The first question landed with the gentleness of a formality, a tone deliberately chosen to disarm. "Ms. Leavitt," Crockett said, her voice even, "can you confirm the date on which you authorized the public statement regarding the outreach protocols?" Leavitt exhaled quietly. "Yes. That statement was released on March 14th. Crockett nodded as if acknowledging a simple fact, though her eyes did not break from the witness. "And can you confirm that you personally reviewed the language before its release?" A brief pause. "I reviewed portions of it." "Portions?" Crockett repeated. The word slipped into the air like a diagnostic test. Which portions? Leavitt straightened in her chair. Primarily the introductory paragraph and the closing remarks. Staffers behind Crockett made quick notes. The room remained still, but something subtle had shifted, a sensation like the first hint of pressure before a storm. Crockett continued, for clarity, were you aware of the embedded directive referencing select messaging amplification within federally funded materials? Leavitt blinked. No, Congresswoman. I was not. Another pause, longer this time. Crockett leaned back slightly, not soothing, not threatening, simply making space for the truth to resonate. A senator 2 seats down adjusted his glasses and leaned toward his microphone. Ms. Leavitt, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, you are obligated to provide complete and accurate information to this committee. Do you understand that? Yes, Senator. I understand. Crockett resumed control. Good. Then let's walk through the sequence. The narrator's lens sharpened. Every movement, every turn of a page, every quiet breath, felt amplified inside the chamber. Crockett flipped to the second page of her binder. Your email from March 11th, timestamped at 9:42 p.m., instructs your team to synchronize all messaging assets ahead of the March 14th release. Was that instruction written by you? Leavitt's fingers tightened around the edge of her prepared statement. That directive referred to ensuring consistency in formatting and public availability. Crockett's eyes narrowed by a millimeter. So you deny that the directive had political intent? I do. A soft camera shutter clicked, once, then again. The room felt increasingly aware that history might be recording itself in real time. Another senator entered the exchange with a procedural tone. Ms. Leavitt, were any taxpayer-funded communication tools used to coordinate public messaging for partisan purposes? This includes software, mailing lists, or staff hours. No, Senator, Leavitt said, voice steady but increasingly thin. To my knowledge, no federal resources were used in a partisan manner. Crockett's pen tapped once against the binder, a quiet, rhythmic sound. Ms. Leavitt, are you aware of Section 717 of the Appropriations Act, which restricts federally funded agencies from engaging in political advocacy? Leavitt nodded. I am aware. Then you understand why your email raises concerns. Silence swelled between them. Leavitt's jaw tensed. For the first time, her gaze flickered not toward Crockett but toward the row of cameras aligned like a line of unblinking witnesses. Crockett leaned in, not aggressively, but with the precision of someone tightening a lens. Just so we are clear, Ms. Leavitt, you stand by your statement that you neither authored nor approved any directive encouraging political messaging through federally funded channels. Yes, Leavitt replied, though the word emerged with an audible tremor. Crockett closed her binder gently, as if concluding a minor procedural matter. But the tone in the room shifted again, more sharply, more noticeably, as though everyone sensed that the foundation had begun to fracture. Thank you, Crockett said calmly. We'll return to that. The chairperson scanned the dais, but no one spoke. The silence was heavier now, thoughtful, anticipatory. Because the questions had only just begun. The next phase did not begin with a question. It began with a sound. A single sheet of paper slid across Crockett's desk, the gentle scrape carrying farther than expected in the compressed silence of the chamber. The subtle movement drew every gaze toward her. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer. Crockett spoke softly, the kind of softness that signals precision rather than mercy. Ms. Leavitt, before I proceed, I want to enter into the record an internal memo obtained through subpoena last week. Leavitt's throat tightened. I'm aware a memo was referenced in the request, yes. Crockett nodded. Then this will not come as a surprise. She lifted the page. Its edges caught the fluorescent light, revealing the faint watermark of a federal department few Americans could name. But the content, only 7 sentences, was enough to shift the trajectory of the hearing. This memo, Crockett said, dated March 10th, is addressed to your communications team. It reads, in relevant part, All outreach assets funded through the Civic Engagement Grant will prioritize language aligning with the campaign's voter efficiency goals. Murmurs fluttered across the room like an involuntary exhale. Crockett continued. Ms. Leavitt, does that language appear familiar to you? Leavitt hesitated. I would need to see the original document to confirm. Crockett passed a copy to the clerk, who handed it to the witness. The paper trembled slightly in Leavitt's hands. As you review that, Crockett said, I want to align this memo with your testimony under oath. Because 3 minutes ago, you stated that you neither authored nor approved any directive encouraging political messaging through federally funded channels. Leavitt swallowed. Yes, that is correct. Then let's examine the metadata. A senator adjusted his microphone. Congresswoman Crockett, for the record, are you referring to the forensic audit conducted by the Office of Inspector General? I am, Crockett replied. The audit confirms that this memo originated from Ms. Leavitt's account, was drafted on her device, and was transmitted using a federal communication platform. Leavitt looked up sharply, eyes widening. I did not approve that language. That draft must have been altered or... Crockett cut in, not with aggression, but with the surgical precision of someone who had waited for this exact moment. Ms. Leavitt, the audit also shows that the memo was edited only once. By the account holder. There were no subsequent modifications. The silence that followed was no longer atmospheric. It was accusatory. Another senator spoke, voice low but firm. Ms. Leavitt, under the Privacy Act Section 552A, unauthorized use of federally protected data for political objectives is strictly prohibited. Did you instruct your team to merge federal outreach lists with campaign analytics tools? Leavitt's breath caught. No, Senator. Absolutely not. Crockett opened her binder again, slowly, deliberately. Then explain this. She lifted a second sheet. An internal email sent from your deputy at 11:03 a.m. on March 12, per KL's guidance, integrate the demographic heat map into the civic outreach cadence. The letter K inch KL felt heavy in the air. Leavitt blinked hard, gripping the table. Congresswoman. I cannot verify the context of that message. These interpretations are being stretched. Stretched? Crockett echoed, leaning forward. Ms. Leavitt, these are your directives. Your timelines. Your accounts. An oversight requires clarity, not elasticity. Leavitt's voice thinned. I may have discussed coordination broadly, but not politically. Crockett's gaze sharpened. Then why did your team refer to voter efficiency goals in a memo tied directly to a federal grant? Leavitt opened her mouth, but no words formed. Across the room, a camera light brightened, its sensor detecting motion, detecting tension, detecting the exact second a witness began losing control. Crockett closed her binder one more time, softer than before. We'll revisit the memo momentarily. There are still inconsistencies that require your clarity. But clarity was drifting farther away with each passing second. And the room could feel it. It began with a question Jasmine Crockett asked as gently as someone setting a glass onto a fragile table. Ms. Leavitt, did you author the phrase of voter efficiency goals? No inflection. No accusation. Just a question built with the clarity of a scalpel. Leavitt didn't answer. Instead, she froze, first in her shoulders, then in her hands, then in the small muscles around her eyes. A witness can hide fear in their voice. They cannot hide it in the stillness of their breath. Crockett waited. The room waited with her. 8 seconds passed. Then 14. Then 20. Somewhere to her left, a staffer shifted. Pens quieted. Cameras leaned in, their lenses whirring faintly, adjusting exposure as if recalibrating for a moment becoming historically relevant. Crockett did not move. She simply watched the witness's silence materialize. Finally, at second 23, Leavitt inhaled, sharp, shallow. The kind of breath someone takes before choosing whether to tell the truth or risk the consequences of avoiding it. Congresswoman, Leavitt began, voice brittle. I may have been briefed on certain. Crockett cut in, not harshly, but with the firmness of constitutional reality. Ms. Leavitt, this is a yes or no question. Did you author that phrase? The microphones captured the tremor that followed. Leavitt's gaze flickered downward, to the memo, to her hands, to the table's reflection revealing her own uncertainty. For the first time, she seemed to recognize that the hearing was no longer a matter of politics. It was a matter of law. Of record. Of perjury. A senator leaned forward, tone clinical. Ms. Leavitt, before you answer, you are reminded that a knowingly false statement to this committee constitutes a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. You are under oath. Proceed carefully. The legal weight landed with physical force. At second 31, Leavitt pressed her palm flat against the table as if steadying herself. At second 36, she opened her mouth, then closed it again. At second 41, a tremor passed through her wrist. At second 44, someone in the overflow room coughed, the sound cutting across the tension like a snapped wire. At second 47, the collapse finally came. Leavitt's voice cracked. I may have drafted preliminary language, but it was never meant. Crockett pounced, not with aggression, but with precision sharpened by preparation. She opened her binder and read aloud. The memo in question, authored from your account on March 10 at 4:19 p.m., contains the phrase verbatim, embedded in a directive explicitly tied to federally funded outreach materials. That language does not exist in any other draft. You were the sole editor. There are no revisions. No alternate authors. The Office of Inspector General has confirmed this. Then, almost gently, do you still deny authorship? Leavitt's composure shattered. Her lips parted as if searching for a defense, but only fragments emerged. I didn't intend, I thought, I was told the grant could. Crockett's voice was calm, unyielding. Intent is not the issue. The Appropriations Act prohibits using federally funded platforms for political objectives. And your directive, your language, violates that boundary. Explicitly. A senator added, this is a textbook breach of the due process protections embedded in neutral governance. Political messaging cannot be disguised as civic instruction. Not under federal law. Leavitt looked up, eyes shining, not with tears, but with the stark recognition that the flaw of her reasoning had fallen away. Crockett leaned in slightly, voice a quiet blade. Ms. Leavitt, your silence says more than your testimony ever could. The room felt colder suddenly. The 47-second moment had passed, but its shadow lingered, etched into every camera feed, every staffer's notes, every breath that went unspoken. And the consequences were only beginning. The chamber did not erupt. It didn't need to. The collapse had occurred in silence, and silence travels faster than outrage in Washington. When the chairperson declared a brief recess, the room exhaled in uneven waves, staffers whispering urgently, reporters rushing toward the nearest exit, attorneys gathering papers with the brisk, clipped movements of people preparing for damage control. Karoline Leavitt remained seated, staring at the empty glass of water in front of her as though it contained an explanation she had somehow overlooked. Her breathing had steadied, but her eyes carried the unmistakable sheen of someone calculating how quickly a political misstep could evolve into a legal crisis. Outside the chamber, the hallway erupted with the choreography of American media. Tripods landed. Cables snaked across the marble. Red lights blinked on as anchors positioned themselves beneath columns built to suggest permanence. Microphones clustered like metallic blossoms as journalists exchanged fragments of analysis in sharp, hurried tones. The first network cut in at 11:19 a.m. We are witnessing what legal scholars are already calling the most devastating congressional unraveling since the early hearings on Watergate, one anchor said, her voice pitched with controlled intensity. For 47 seconds, America watched a senior communications director freeze under oath. Another commentator added, this was not political theater. This was statutory exposure. When Representative Jasmine Crockett read the Inspector General's metadata findings aloud, it fundamentally altered the trajectory of the investigation. Clips of the moment replayed on a loop, Leavitt's hands tightening. The silence stretching. Crockett's voice, calm and unwavering, "Do you still deny authorship?" Frame by frame, analysts dissected the sequence as though it were forensic footage rather than congressional testimony. One legal expert, appearing on a midday panel, offered a blunt assessment: intent is irrelevant. Once Ms. Leavitt acknowledged drafting preliminary language, even partially, she exposed herself to violations of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 and potential breaches of the Appropriations Clause. The committee will likely refer this for further investigation. Another added, the collapse didn't happen at the answer. The collapse happened at the silence. It was the silence that told the truth. Across social media, clips of the moment surged into trending categories: #47 seconds, #Crockett demolishes, #Grant directive scandal. Even typically cautious outlets joined the analysis. A conservative legal podcast described the exchange as a catastrophic misreading of congressional procedure. A left-leaning policy blog framed it as one of the cleanest oversight takedowns in recent memory. Journalists began digging deeper into the civic engagement grant, tracing its lineage through appropriations subcommittees, cross-referencing its restrictions with recent audits. They discovered that Leavitt had personally advocated for expanded messaging controls during a departmental retreat 6 months earlier. Though not illegal, the optics aligned too neatly with the memo now under scrutiny. By mid-afternoon, press secretaries across the Capitol were preparing preemptive statements. Agencies distanced themselves. Former colleagues avoided comment. Lobbyists expressed concern about procedural integrity, a phrase that usually served as a polite marker of political abandonment. Inside the committee chamber, Jasmine Crockett remained composed. Her team whispered updates about the unfolding media reaction, but she simply nodded, her gaze steady, posture unchanged. She understood Washington's rhythm: hearings were not won by outrage, but by precision. And precision had been the tool she wielded. She glanced toward the witness table where Leavitt now sat with her attorney, shoulders lower, expression dimmed. The collapse of confidence was no longer subtle. It was structural. When the recess concluded, the chairperson returned to the dais. Cameras flickered back to life. The room settled once more into its formal geometry of microphones and authority. Crockett closed her binder, signaling readiness. Because the fallout was only the beginning. And the consequences still had to be spoken aloud. The hearing reconvened with a stillness that felt earned. Not imposed by rules, not demanded by decorum, earned by the gravity of what the nation had just witnessed. The chandeliers overhead hummed faintly, their light steady and cold, casting long reflections across the polished mahogany where truth and consequence had collided only minutes earlier. Karoline Leavitt returned to the witness table with measured steps. Her expression had changed. Not broken, not defeated, simply aware. The awareness that arrives when the margin for denial narrows into a single, unavoidable line. Jasmine Crockett took her seat slowly, hands folded atop a closed binder. There was no triumph in her posture. Oversight wasn't about victory. It was about record, accountability, constitutional fidelity. The chairperson spoke first. We will resume with limited additional questions before we move to closing statements. Crockett nodded, signaling she wished to speak. She leaned toward the microphone, not forward, not aggressively, just enough that her voice would carry with unbroken clarity. Ms. Leavitt, she began, when we ask questions in this setting, we do so not to embarrass witnesses, nor to create political spectacle. We ask because the public trusts us with the obligation to safeguard federal resources and constitutional boundaries. Leavitt listened, her posture more composed now, though her hands remained clasped too tightly to be comfortable. Crockett continued, her tone measured and reflective. The civic engagement grant exists for civic literacy, not for political optimization. It was created under statutory restrictions that require strict neutrality. When you drafted language referencing voter efficiency goals, you crossed a boundary that Congress itself is mandated to protect. A senator added, that boundary isn't symbolic. It is structural, tied directly to the neutral administration principles embedded in the Due Process Clause. Federal programs cannot be engineered to favor partisan messaging. The Constitution does not permit it. Leavitt nodded once, slowly. I understand that now. Crockett's gaze softened, not forgiving, not condemning, simply clearer. Understanding is important, Ms. Leavitt. But so is accountability. The witness inhaled, steadying her voice. Congresswoman, I acknowledge that I drafted language I should not have. I did not intend to politicize federal materials, but I accept that my decisions created the appearance, and perhaps the reality, of bias. It was the closest she could come to a full admission. And in Washington, the difference between appearance and reality often dissolves under scrutiny. The chairperson recorded the statement into the official minutes. A murmur passed through the gallery, quiet but significant. Crockett continued, this committee will issue formal recommendations. They will likely include referrals for review by the Office of Inspector General, and perhaps the Department of Justice. Those agencies will assess whether statutory violations occurred. Leavitt closed her eyes briefly, as though absorbing the administrative weight of each acronym. The senator at the far end of the dais offered a final reminder, this hearing underscores why oversight exists. Governance without scrutiny is not governance. It is assumption. A long silence followed. The kind that belongs not to tension, but to understanding. The camera panned slowly across the chamber, capturing no chaos, no raised voices, no collapsing drama. Just a room where procedure had been honored, where truth had been coaxed out not through force, but through persistence. Crockett folded her hands again. Her voice carried a quieter gravity now. Neutrality is not optional. Not in messaging. Not in governance. Not in law. The public deserves institutions that do not bend toward political advantage. Leavitt lowered her gaze. I agree. The hearing moved toward formal adjournment. The gavel struck once, clean, definitive. Reporters stirred. Staffers gathered documents. The architecture of the room, built for continuity, absorbed the moment as it had absorbed countless others. But some moments linger. As the participants dispersed into the marble corridors, the narrator's perspective widened. Washington would debate the implications for weeks. Legal analysts would parse statutory language. Partisans would attempt to recast the narrative. But none of that could change the simple truth carved into the day. For 47 seconds, a silence revealed the limits of political confidence. And no institution forgets a silence like that. Because some careers end in scandal. And some end in the sound of nothing at all.